And next online for the neurodevelopmental disorders, we have the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or the ADHD. ADHD for the diagnostic criteria. For the criterion A, persistent pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity impulsivity that interferes with functioning or development as characterized by one or two of the following. For one, inattention. 6 or more of the following symptoms have persisted for at least 6 months to a degree that is inconsistent with developmental level and that negatively impacts directly on social and academic or occupational activities. So the symptoms are not solely a manifestation of oppositional behavior, defiance, hostility, or failure to understand tasks or instructions. For older adolescents and adults ages 17 and older, at least 5 ng symptoms ang required. So here are the symptoms. A. Often fails to give close attention to details or makes careless mistakes in schoolwork, at work, or during other activities. Example, overlooks or misses details. Work is inaccurate. B. Often has difficulty sustaining attention in tasks or play activities such as has difficulty remaining focused during lectures, conversations, or lengthy reading. C. Often does not seem to listen when spoken to directly, such as mind seems elsewhere, even in the absence of any obvious distraction. D. Often does not follow through on instructions and fails to finish schoolwork, chores, or duties in the workplace, such as starts tasks but quickly loses focus and is easily sidetracked. E. Often has difficulty organizing tasks and activities, such as difficulty managing sequential tasks, difficulty keeping materials and belongings in order, messy, disorganized work, has poor time management, fails to meet deadlines. F. Often avoids or dislikes or is reluctant to engage in tasks that require sustained mental effort, such as schoolwork or homework. For older adolescents and adults, preparing reports, completing forms, and reviewing lengthy papers. G. Often loses things necessary for tasks or activities, such as school materials, pencils, books, tools, wallets, keys, paperwork, and etc. H. Is often easily distracted by extraneous stimuli. For older adolescents and adults, it may include unrelated thoughts. I. Is often forgetful in daily activities such as doing chores, running errands. For older adolescents and adults, it includes returning calls, paying bills, and keeping appointments. For number 2, for hyperactivity and impulsivity. 6 or more of the following symptoms have persisted for at least 6 months to a degree that is inconsistent with developmental levels and that negatively impacts directly on social and academic or occupational activities. So the symptoms are not solely a manifestation of oppositional behavior, defiance, hostility, or a failure to understand tasks or instructions. For older adolescents and adults ages 17 and older, at least 5 ng symptoms ang required. So A. Often fidgets with or taps hands or feet or squirms in seat. B. Often leaves seat in situations when remaining seated is expected, such as leaves his or her place in the classroom, in the office or the workplace, and etc. C. Often runs about or climbs in situations where it is inappropriate. So in adolescents or adults, it may be limited to feeling restless. D. Often unable to play or engage in leisure activities quietly. E is often on the go, acting as if driven by a motor. Example, he or she is unable to be or uncomfortable being still for extended time, as in restaurants and meetings, may be experienced by others as being restless or difficult to keep up with. For F, often talks excessively. G often blurts out an answer before a question has been completed. Example, completes people's sentences and cannot wait for turn in conversation. H often has difficulty waiting for his or her turn, such as while waiting in line. I often interrupts or intrudes on others, such as butts into conversations, games, or activities. May start using other people's things without asking or receiving permission. For adolescents and adults, it may intrude into or take over what others are doing. So for criterion A pala, inattention manifests behaviorally in ADHD as wandering off task, failing to follow through on instruction, or finishing work or chores. Having difficulty sustaining focus and being disorganized and is not attributable to defiance or lack of comprehension. So for the diagnostic features, yun na nga. So hyperactivity refers to excessive motor activity. In adults, hyperactivity may manifest as extreme restlessness or wearing others out with their activity. And impulsivity naman refers to hasty actions that occur in the moment without forethought, which may have potential for harm to the individual. So impulsivity may reflect a desire for immediate reward or an inability to delay gratification. Impulsive behaviors may manifest as social intrusiveness and or as making important decisions without consideration of long-term consequences. So for criterion B, several inattentive or hyperactive impulsive symptoms were present prior to age 12 years. So ADHD begins in childhood. The requirement that several symptoms be present before age 12 years conveys the importance of a substantial clinical presentation during childhood. So at the same time, an earlier age at onset is not specified because of difficulties in establishing precise childhood onset retrospectively. So adult recall of childhood symptoms tends to be unreliable, and it is beneficial to obtain ancillary information. So ADHD cannot be diagnosed in the absence of any symptoms prior to age 12. When symptoms of what appears to be ADHD first occur after age 13, they are more likely to be explained by another mental disorder or to represent the cognitive effects of substance use. For criterion C, several inattentive or hyperactive impulsive symptoms are present in two or more settings, such as at home, in school or work, with friends or relatives, or in other activities. So confirmation of substantial symptoms across settings typically cannot be done accurately without consulting informants who have seen the individual in those settings. So typically, symptoms vary depending on context within a given setting. For criterion D, there is clear evidence that the symptoms interfere with or reduce the quality of social, academic, or occupational functioning. Criterion E, the symptoms do not occur exclusively during the course of schizophrenia or another psychotic disorder and are not better explained by another mental disorder. For its specifiers, for F90.2, combined presentation. So, this specifier is diagnosed if both criterion A1 or the inattention and criterion A2 or hyperactivity impulsivity are met for the past 6 months. For F90.0 or predominantly inattentive presentation, this criteria or this specifier is diagnosed if na-met yung criterion A1 which is inattention pero hindi na-meet yung criterion A2 which is the hyperactivity impulsivity for the past 6 months. For F90.1, predominantly hyperactive impulsive presentation. So, ito ay yung if ang criterion A2 naman ang na-meet which is the impulsivity pero hindi na-meet yung criterion A1 which is the inattention for the past 6 months. So, also specify if in partial remission. When full criteria were previously met, fewer than the full criteria have been met for the past 6 months and the symptoms still result in impairment in social, academic, or occupational functioning. Also, specify current severity. If mild, it means that few, if any, symptoms in excess or those required to make the diagnosis are present and symptoms result in no more than minor impairments in social or occupational functioning. For moderate, symptoms of functional impairment between mild and severe are present, and for severe, many symptoms in excess of those required to make the diagnosis, or several symptoms that are particularly severe are present, or the symptoms result in marked impairment in social or occupational functioning. For the associated features, delays in language, motor, or social development are not specific to ADHD but often co-occur. So, emotional dysregulation or emotional impulsivity commonly occurs in children and adults with ADHD. So, yung mga individual na may ADHD, nag-self-report sila and they are described by other people as being quick to anger, easily frustrated, and overreactive emotionally. Also, academic or work performance is often impaired and may exhibit neurocognitive deficits in variety of areas. So, children na mayroong neurodevelopmental disorders with a known cause may often also have symptoms of inattention and impulsivity, hyperactivity. They should receive an ADHD diagnosis if their symptoms meet the full criteria for the disorder. So for the prevalence, population survey suggests that ADHD occurs worldwide in about 7.2% of children. However, cross-national prevalence ranges widely from 0.1% to 10.2% of children and adolescents. So prevalence is higher in special populations such as foster children or correctional settings. In a cross-national meta-analysis, ADHD occurred in 2.5% of adults. So, development and course. So, symptoms are difficult to distinguish from highly variable normative behaviors before age 4 years. ADHD is most often identified during elementary school years. In preschool, the main manifestation is hyperactivity. Inattention becomes more prominent siya during elementary school. During adolescence naman, signs of hyperactivity are less common and may be confined to fidgetiness or an inner feeling of jitteriness, restlessness, or impatience. In adulthood naman, along with inattention and restlessness, impulsivity may remain problematic even when hyperactivity has diminished. So for the risk and prognosis factors. So, temperamental. ADHD is associated with reduced behavioral inhibition, effortful control, or constraint, negative emotionality, and or elevated novelty seeking. These traits may predispose some children to ADHD but are not specific to the disorder. For the environmental, very low birth weight and degree of prematurity convey a great risk for ADHD. The more extreme the low weight, the greater the risk. Prenatal exposure to smoking is associated also with ADHD even after controlling for parental psychiatric history and socioeconomic status. So a minority of cases may be related to reactions to aspects of diet. Neurotoxin exposure, infections, and alcohol exposure in utero have been correlated with subsequent ADHD, but it is not known whether these associations are causal. For the genetic and physiological, the heritability of ADHD is approximately 74%. Large-scale genome-wide association studies, or the GWAS, have identified a number of lossy enriched in evolutionary constrained genomic regions and loss of function genes, as well as around brain expressed regulatory regions. So there is no single gene for ADHD. Visual and hearing impairments, metabolic abnormalities, and nutritional deficiencies should be considered as possible influences on ADHD symptoms. ADHD is elevated in individuals with idiopathic epilepsy. For the course modifiers, so family interaction patterns in early childhood are unlikely to cause ADHD, but may influence only its course or contribute to secondary development or conduct problems. For the culture-related diagnostic issues, differences in ADHD prevalence across regions appear attributable mainly to different diagnostic procedures and methodological practices. Prevalence is also affected by cultural variation in attitudes toward behavioral norms and expectations of children and youth in different social contexts, as well as cultural differences in interpretations of children's behavior by parents and teachers, including differences by gender. For the sex and gender-related diagnostic issues, so ADHD is more frequent in males than in females in the general population, with a ratio of approximately 2:1 in children and 1.6:1 in adults. Females are more likely than males to present. Females are more likely than males to present primarily with an attentive feature. Sex differences in ADHD symptom severity. Sex differences in ADHD symptom severity may be due to differing genetic and cognitive liabilities between sexes. For the diagnostic markers, so no biological marker is diagnostic for ADHD, and no form of neuroimaging can be used for diagnosis of ADHD. So association with suicidal thoughts or behavior. So ADHD is a risk factor for suicidal ideation and behavior in children. Similarly, in adulthood, ADHD is associated with an increased risk of suicide attempt when comorbid with mood conduct or substance use disorders, even after controlling for comorbidity. So suicidal thoughts are also more common in ADHD population than in non-ADHD control subjects. For the functional consequences of ADHD, ADHD is associated with reduced school performance and academic attainment. Young adults with ADHD have poor job stability. Family relationships may be characterized by discord and negative interactions. Children with ADHD are significantly more likely than their peers without ADHD to develop conduct disorder in adolescence and antisocial personality disorder in adulthood, consequently increasing the likelihood for substance use disorders and incarceration. So individuals with ADHD are more likely than peers to be injured. For the differential diagnosis, oppositional defiant disorder. So their behavior is characterized by negativity, hostility, and defiance. Complicating the differential diagnosis is the fact that some individuals with ADHD may develop secondary oppositional attitudes towards such tasks and devalue their importance. For the intermittent explosive disorder, ADHD and intermittent explosive disorder share high levels of impulsive behavior. However, individuals with intermittent explosive disorder show serious aggression toward others, which is not a characteristic of ADHD po, and they do not experience problems with sustaining attention as seen in ADHD. In addition, intermittent explosive disorder is rare in childhood. Intermittent explosive disorder may be diagnosed in the presence of ADHD. For the other neurodevelopmental disorders, in stereotypic movement disorder, the motoric behavior is generally fixed and repetitive, whereas the fidgetiness and the restlessness in ADHD are typically generalized and not characterized by repetitive stereotypic movements. So in Tourette's disorder naman, frequent multiple tics can be mistaken for the generalized fidgetiness of ADHD. So prolonged observation may be needed to differentiate fidgetiness from bouts of multiple tics. For specific learning disorder naman, children with specific learning disorder alone may appear inattentive because of frustration, lack of interest, or limited ability in neurocognitive processes, including working memory and processing speed, whereas their inattention is much reduced when performing a skill that does not require the impaired cognitive process. For intellectual developmental disorder naman, symptoms of ADHD are common in children with intellectual developmental disorder placed in academic settings that are inappropriate to their intellectual disability. In such cases, the symptoms are not evident during non-academic tasks. A diagnosis of ADHD in intellectual developmental disorder requires that inattention or hyperactivity be excessive for mental age. For autism spectrum disorder naman, the social and peer rejections in individuals with ADHD must be distinguished from the social disengagement, isolation, and indifference to facial and tonal communication cues seen in individuals with autism spectrum disorder. So children with autism spectrum disorder may display tantrums because of an inability to tolerate a change from the expected course of events. Yung mga children with ADHD naman may misbehave or have a tantrum during a major transition because of impulsivity or poor self-control. For reactive attachment disorder naman, children with reactive attachment disorder may show social disinhibition but not the full ADHD symptom cluster and display other features such as a lack of enduring relationships that are not characteristic of ADHD. For anxiety disorders, individuals with ADHD are inattentive because of their preferential engagement with novel and stimulating activities or preoccupation with enjoyable activities. So this is distinguished from the inattention attributable to worry and rumination seen in anxiety disorders. So restlessness might be seen in anxiety disorders. However, in ADHD, the symptom is not associated with worry and rumination. Next, we have post-traumatic stress disorder. Children younger than 6 years often manifest PTSD in non-specific symptoms such as restlessness, irritability, inattention, and poor concentration, which can mimic ADHD. So parents may also minimize their children's trauma-related symptoms, and teachers and other caregivers are often unaware of the child's exposure to traumatic events. A comprehensive assessment of past exposure to traumatic events can rule out PTSD, or the post-traumatic stress disorder. For depressive disorders, individuals with depressive disorders may present with inability to concentrate. However, poor concentration and mood disorders become prominent only during a depressive episode. For bipolar disorder, individuals with bipolar disorder may have increased activity, poor concentration, and increased impulsivity, but these features are episodic, unlike ADHD, in which the symptoms are persistent. For disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, so disruptive mood dysregulation disorder is characterized by pervasive irritability and intolerance of frustration, but impulsiveness and disorganized attention are not essential features. However, most children and adolescents with the disorder also have symptoms that meet criteria for ADHD, which is diagnosed separately. For substance use disorders, differentiating ADHD from substance use disorders may be problematic if the first presentation of ADHD symptoms follows the onset of abuse or frequent use. Clear evidence of ADHD before substance misuse from informants or previous records may be essential for differential diagnosis. For personality disorders, some personality disorders tend to share the features of disorganization, social intrusiveness, emotional dysregulation, and cognitive dysregulation. However, ADHD is not characterized by fear of abandonment, self-injury, extreme ambivalence, or other features of personality disorder. It may take extended clinical observation, informant interview, or detailed history of distinguished impulsive, socially intrusive, or inappropriate behavior from narcissistic, aggressive, or domineering behavior to make this differential diagnosis. For psychotic disorders, ADHD is not diagnosed if the symptoms of inattention, hyperactivity occur exclusively during the course of a psychotic disorder. For medication-induced symptoms of ADHD, symptoms of inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity attributable to the use of medication are diagnosed as other specified or unspecified other substance. Neurocognitive disorders. While impairment in complex attention may be one of the affective cognitive domains in a neurocognitive disorder, it must represent a decline from a previous level of performance in order to justify a diagnosis of major or mild neurocognitive disorder. Moreover, major or mild neurocognitive disorder typically has its onset in adulthood. In contrast, the inattention in ADHD must have been present prior to age 12 and does not represent a decline from previous functioning. For comorbidity, females with ADHD have higher rates of a number of comorbid disorders, particularly oppositional defiant disorder, autism spectrum disorder, and personality and substance use disorders. ADHD may co-occur in variable symptom profiles with other neurodevelopmental disorders, including specific learning disorder, autism spectrum disorder, intellectual developmental disorder, language disorders, developmental coordination disorder, and tic disorders. Comorbid sleep disorders in ADHD are associated with daytime impairments in cognition. So individuals with ADHD have been found to have elevated rates of a number of medical conditions, particularly allergy and autoimmune disorders as well as epilepsy. So under the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, we have also the other specified attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, F90.8. So clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning predominate but do not meet the full criteria. So clinician chooses to communicate the specific reason. So other specified attention deficit hyperactivity disorder followed by the specific reason. So, yun po yung pag-record ng diagnosis. Yung other specified attention deficit hyperactivity disorder followed by the specific reason. Example, other specified attention deficit hyperactivity disorder with insufficient inattention symptoms. For the unspecified attention deficit hyperactivity disorder naman, or F90.9, symptoms, characteristics of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder that cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning predominate but do not meet the full criteria. So, clinician chooses not to specify the reason. So, insufficient information to make a more specific diagnosis. So, yung sa other specified ADHD, clinician chooses to communicate the specific reason, while in unspecified naman, the clinician chooses not to specify the reason and there is an insufficient information to make a more specific diagnosis. And for the summary,
Thank you for listening and God bless and good luck sa mga disorders pa na paparating.